Can permanent residents be denied re-entry into the United States? This is a question that I've been getting like 20 times a week recently. And so I wanted to make another video yet again explaining this situation. And this all comes with news recently that Trump is going to institute a new travel ban or a series of travel bans, probably as some sort of punishment for countries that he doesn't like or world leaders that he doesn't like, because that's what Trump does. So let's talk about what could actually happen, the legality of travel bans, and whether or not, as a permanent resident, you can be denied re-entry. So the general answer is that yes, you can be denied re-entry, but that travel bans are probably also illegal. Let's dive into this a little bit. So first of all, and I've discussed this in a bunch of videos, but for people who aren't subscribed, I'll say it again here. As a permanent resident, you generally have an absolute right to re-enter the US with several exceptions. If you're inadmissible for crime or fraud or some other immigration violation, you might not have the legal right to re-enter the US, and if you do, the government might try to force you to sign a voluntary abandonment of your residency form by signing Form I-407 in the airport. And if you refuse, they might give you a notice to appear in immigration court, and they can either detain you under some circumstances, especially if you've been convicted of serious crimes, or release you into the US, which is usually what happens in these scenarios. And then once you're in the US, you have to attend your immigration court proceedings. Another example of a time where they might try to deny your entry or try to get you to sign the voluntary abandonment form or place you into deportation proceedings is if you spent more than 1 year continuously outside of the US. In those scenarios, there's a presumption that you've abandoned your residency and you can easily be placed into removal proceedings upon re-entry into the US. Again, normally you're permitted to enter the US, you're given a notice to appear in immigration court, and you have to attend court. But sometimes, in rare situations, increasingly more frequent, you can be detained when you re-enter the US. I actually just had clients re-enter the US after abandoning their residency. They were held for a couple hours and released into the US, and now we have to defend them in immigration court. The good news is we have a clear strategy. They're gonna be able to keep their permanent residency, but it's still gonna be somewhat stressful. Now let's talk about travel bans. And this is when the government tries to deny a permanent resident from entering the US, even though the permanent resident himself or herself has done nothing wrong. Anyone who is not a permanent resident, students, tourists, people entering on parole, can always be denied entry. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about people with actual green cards. And before you ask, citizens, always allowed back into the US, not even a question, beyond the scope of this video. But permanent residents are what we're discussing here, people who actually have green cards. So during Trump's first Muslim country ban, he issued this right after he was inaugurated in 2017. And it was in effect for a couple days, and during those couple of days, permanent residents from several Muslim majority countries were actually denied entry into the US and put back on repatriation flights back to their home country, which was devastating, especially if they're coming from the Middle East. An expensive flight back ruins your day. So what happened? Within a couple days, a judge enjoined the Trump administration's policies by saying this is illegal. And so a month or two later, the Trump administration instituted Muslim Travel Ban 2.0, where they took the ruling from the prior court and they changed it around a little to make it less illegal. And then they again started denying people from re-entering. And within a couple of days of that, another federal judge stopped this new policy from being implemented because it also was illegal. And one of the key points that came out of all of these court cases, which ended up being litigated for the next couple of years and even going all the way up to the Supreme Court, was that permanent residents have the right to re-enter the US. The Trump administration cannot just deny their re-entry arbitrarily for no real reason just because they are from a specific country. But the question remains, can the Trump administration do it? Well, they did it twice before, and if you were one of the few unlucky immigrants to enter during those few days where the policies were in full effect, I'm sorry, you were out of luck. At great expense to you and your family, you were deported and then eventually allowed back into the United States. So yes, they can do it. They have done it. And I believe they're gonna do it again. Now, I also believe that those actions were illegal, but that's never actually stopped them from implementing something, only within a couple days to have a federal judge slap them down and say, no, you can't do that. But as we see in the news, the Trump administration is increasingly beginning to be defiant of federal court orders. So I wouldn't want to be one of the people who's caught up in all of this, even though legally you have the right to re-enter the United States. With all of that said, permanent residents constantly ask me if they should travel, and my response is yes. You have nothing rendering you inadmissible. I've reviewed the facts of your case. I've asked you a lot of questions. I'm confident I understand your immigration history. And in this situation, the government cannot deny your re-entry. But when I actually say that, I'm actually wrong, because they can. They can illegally deny your re-entry, but my job is to analyze the law and give you legal advice based on that. So maybe from now on, I'm gonna amend my guidance to say legally, they cannot deny your entry. But practically speaking, if they do something illegal, our remedies are pretty limited, and you're still gonna have to deal with the consequence of trying to figure it out once they deport you to your home country, even if a week later a judge reverses that policy and you're allowed back into the US. You know, the whole reason for having laws and lawyers and a legal system and a judiciary is so that you can predict what certain outcomes can be. And so that structure can inform your decisions on how to behave in the future. But when the government just arbitrarily does illegal actions, it becomes impossible to rely on the law or legal guidance or legal advice. It all just becomes a kangaroo court situation. You see this in some countries where there's rampant corruption, no real rule of law, and I'm becoming scared that that's actually what's happening here. It's a really lawless situation when the government can just do whatever they want. They could ignore the laws, they could ignore court orders telling them that they can't break the law, and when the consequences have insufficient teeth to incentivize the government in the future to continue following the law. So that's the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in right now. The Trump administration is constantly stepping over the line. Lawyers are trying to make them, step back. But it seems like the Trump administration is taking 3 steps forward, 1 step back. They're still making progress, implementing their illegal agenda. So it's just a really sad time to be an immigrant in the US. And for people who think this is just affecting illegal immigration, that's not true at all. This channel is mostly about lawful immigration, and people who are trying to do everything the right way are still getting screwed over in the process. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. If you personally need any immigration assistance, you could always schedule a consultation directly with me. You can find my information in the video description below. I focus on family-based immigration, naturalization, deportation defense, and just doing consultations to give people legal advice and create a strategy for the future. I do not focus on employment-based visas such as H-1Bs, EB-2, or anything where an employer petitions for an immigrant to live legally in the United States. If you're interested in immigration related topics such as family-based immigration, naturalization, and changes to Trump's immigration policies, be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be putting out at least 5 videos a week for the next year, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.